The lot opened at 5:40 in the morning, and Nora Hale had the keys to all of it. Not the cars, the lot, the gates, the lights on their slow timers, the salt bin by the loading dock, the little gray box that controlled the heaters embedded in the ramp, so the executives wouldn't slip on ice in their good shoes. She had a ring of keys heavy enough to pull her work pants sideways, and a cart that squeaked on its back left wheel no matter how much she greased it, and a thermos of coffee she'd poured at 4 in her kitchen while it was still dark enough to see her own reflection in the window over the sink. 3 weeks into the job, she still got there before anyone, habit from another life. You opened the shop before the men showed up. You had the lights on and the kettle going and the first car already up on the lift, because the worst thing in the world was a customer pulling in to find people standing around drinking coffee. Daniel used to laugh at her for it. "We're not a diner, Nor," he'd say, and she'd say, "No, we're better. People come back to a diner because they're hungry. They come back to us because we made them feel like they weren't fools for trusting us." He never had an answer to that one. She swept the visitor spaces first. Cigarette butts, a coffee lid, a parking stub somebody had folded into a tiny tight triangle and dropped. She picked it up, unfolded it, looked at the time stamp out of nothing but the old reflex of wanting to know things, and put it in her pocket. The ramp heaters hummed. Somewhere up on the 4th level, a pigeon was making a home it would lose by Thursday. Then she came around the concrete pillar into the executive row, and there it was. She had seen it the first morning. She'd told herself it was a coincidence the size of a continent, and that the smart thing was to keep her eyes on her cart and her cart on its squeaky wheel. She had managed that for 3 weeks. This morning she did not manage it. The car sat in the spot marked Crane, nose out, the way people park a thing they want others to see when they walk in. Low and wide, and the particular green of a bottle held up to a window. Most people would have called it just a Lamborghini and moved on. Most people couldn't have told you that the green wasn't a Lamborghini color at all, that it was mixed 3 times in a booth in a building that no longer existed, that the man who shot it had a tremor in his left hand and held the gun in his right, and laid down a coat so even you'd swear it came out of a factory. Most people would not have known that the side marker lights were from a different car entirely, because the originals had cracked and weren't made anymore, and a kid named Petey had driven to 4 states to find a pair, or that under the rear clip there was a fabricated brace that didn't exist on any other example in the world, because the chassis had come to them folded like a beer can, and they'd had to invent the thing that would let it ever be a car again. Nora knew all of that the way you know the freckles on your own arm. She parked the cart. She didn't decide to. She crouched, the way you crouch to a child or a dog, knees popping, and she looked along the bottom of the door where the rocker met the sill, and she saw the bead she had laid down with her own hand a 1/4 of a century ago, ground and filled and painted over so smooth that you could only find it if you already knew it was there. There was a sound she didn't like, a tick, slow, irregular, the kind of tick that isn't the engine cooling because the engine was stone cold and had been all night. She put her ear closer. She put her palm flat on the green metal, which she was not supposed to do, which the laminated card in her welcome folder explicitly said she was never to do to any vehicle on the property. The tick again, under the front toward the left, a drip finding its own rhythm. She should have written it down and put the note under the wiper and walked away. She knew that. She had 3 weeks of knowing exactly where the line was, and she had stood on her side of it like a good employee. But she had built this car, and the car was telling her something was wrong, and there are a few things in this world that override a laminated card, and the voice of something you made is one of them. She unlatched the front compartment. Lambos like this carried the radiator up front, the tank, the master cylinders. All the things people forget are even there because they're staring at the engine behind the seats. The latch gave with a click she felt in her teeth. She lifted the lid. The coolant was weeping from a hose clamp that had backed off a 1/4 turn. Not a failure, not yet. The kind of small wrong thing that becomes a roadside fire on a hot day if nobody catches it. She reached in with 2 fingers to feel where the wet was coming from, found it, confirmed it, and was reaching for the rag in her back pocket when a voice came across the concrete like a slap. "Get away from that car." Nora straightened, not fast. She was past the age of jumping. The woman crossing the lot was maybe 45, in a charcoal coat that fit her the way good things fit people who can afford to have them taken in, heels striking the floor in a hard double rhythm. She had a phone in one hand and a key fob in the other, and an expression on her face that Nora had seen on 100 faces over the years. The expression of someone who has decided what's happening before they're close enough to see it. "I said get away from it." The woman was 10 feet off now. "What are you doing? Is that open? Did you open that?" "There's a hose clamp." Step back from the car." She was beside it now, between Nora and the open compartment, one hand spread protectively over the green paint as though Nora were a wave that might take it. "Do you have any idea what this is?" Nora did. She said nothing. "This is not, you don't touch this. Nobody touches this." "There is a sign." There wasn't a sign on the car, but there was, abstractly, everywhere, the sign that some things are not for some people. "Who are you? Are you supposed to be here?" "Facilities," Nora said. "I open the lot." "You open the lot, you don't open my car." The woman's voice climbed, found the concrete, came back doubled. Up on the second level, a door opened and a man in a quarter-zip leaned over the rail to watch, the way people do. "I come down here and there's somebody with their hands inside my engine. Do you understand how that looks? Do you understand what a car like this is worth? You could have, what were you even reaching for?" "It's leaking coolant," Nora said. "The clamp on the lower hose backed off. It needs a quarter turn and a top-up. If you drive it like this, it'll dump on a hot day, and you'll cook the—" "I have people for that." "All right. I have a service that comes to my house. I do not have a janitor pawing through it in a parking garage." She caught herself a little on the word, not out of decency but out of the awareness that there were now 3 people watching from the second level. She lowered her voice into something harder and more contained, which was worse. "Never touch my Lamborghini again. Are we clear? Whatever you think you know, whatever you think you were doing, never again." Nora looked at her for a moment. There were a lot of things she could have said. She had said versions of them to clients across a counter for 30 years. Gently, because a frightened person who has just been told their pride and joy is sick gets to be unreasonable for about 90 seconds, and a good shop lets them. But she wasn't behind a counter. She was a woman in gray coveralls holding a rag, and the laminated card was very clear, and there was nothing she was owed here and nothing this woman would believe. "Clear," she said. She closed the front compartment. She did it the way she did everything with that car, with 2 hands, easing the lid down until the latch took rather than dropping it. And the woman watched her do it, and something flickered behind her face. Surprise, maybe, that the janitor knew how to close a hood and was gone before it meant anything. Nora took the handle of her cart. The back left wheel squeaked. She walked the long way around the pillar so she wouldn't have to pass close again, and she heard the woman behind her saying into her phone, in the bright, clear voice of someone performing competence for an audience, No, it's fine, just some maintenance person. I handled it." The man in the quarter-zip went back inside. The pigeon resettled. The ramp heaters hummed. Nora finished the lot. She always finished the lot. Her name was Vivian Crane, and she ran the company. Nora learned this the way you learn anything in a big building when you're invisible. In pieces, sideways, from people who don't notice you're listening. Strand Robotics made things Nora didn't fully understand, arms for warehouses, mostly, mechanical arms that picked and sorted faster than people, and never asked for a Saturday off. Vivian Crane had taken it over from her father, a man named Arthur whose name was on the lobby wall in brushed steel letters and whose photograph hung by the elevators, a big square-jawed face with kind eyes that didn't match the jaw. Arthur J. Crane, 1944–2021. Founder. The plaque under it said something about vision. Nora stood in front of that photograph longer than she meant to. The first time she really looked at it, mop bucket parked beside her, the floor drying in a fan shape behind her. She knew that face. She'd shaken that hand. She'd stood in a gravel drive 25 years ago and watched that man walk around a green car 3 full times without saying a word, and on the 4th pass he'd stopped and put his hand on the roof and said, in a voice that had cracked right down the middle, "My God, you found her." Like the car was a person, like they'd brought back someone he'd lost. So Arthur Crane was dead, and his daughter had the car, and his daughter did not know that the woman she'd screamed at in the parking garage was the same woman her father had once tried to give a check large enough that Daniel had laughed out loud and torn it in half and said, "Mr. Crane, you already paid us. This is just you being happy." And Arthur had laughed too, and the 3 of them had stood in the cold drinking bad coffee out of paper cups while the car ticked and cooled and breathed. Nora wrung out the mop. Some things you carry around all day in your chest like a stone in a coat pocket, and the only thing to do is keep moving so it doesn't have a chance to settle. The girl found her at lunch. Nora ate in the loading dock on an overturned milk crate, where the roll door was cracked enough to let in the cold, clean air and the sound of the road. She liked it back there. Nobody back there wanted anything from her. "You're the one," the girl said. She was maybe 22, in a Strand polo 2 sizes too big, a lanyard with about 9 cards on it, and the specific anxious energy of someone 3 weeks into their first real job. From this morning, with Ms. Crane's car, everybody's talking about it. "Are they?" "Casey," the girl stuck out a hand. "Facilities, sort of. I do badges and the supply closet and whatever Marcus doesn't want to do. You're Nora, right? Marcus said you started like 3 weeks ago and you don't talk." "He's right about one of those." Casey grinned, sat down uninvited on a stack of pallets, unwrapped a sandwich that was mostly bread. "She really yelled at you, like full on." "It was early. People are different when they're scared." "Scared of what? It's a parking garage." Nora considered the question, which was a better one than the girl knew. "Scared the thing they love is breaking and they can't stop it." Casey chewed on that and on her sandwich. "That's a weird way to put it. It's a car." "It is," Nora agreed. She made Marcus pull the garage footage to see if you touched anything else. Casey said it half as gossip and half as warning, the way you tell someone there's a wasp behind them. "I saw it." "The footage? You just opened the front and looked and closed it. That's all you did. I told Marcus that's all you did." "Thank you." "So why'd she lose it?" Casey wadded up the plastic wrap. "If you didn't even do anything." Nora looked out the gap in the door at the gray morning going grayer. A truck downshifted somewhere out on the access road. She thought about how to answer a question whose true answer was 25 years long and would mean nothing to a girl in a too big polo. "It was leaking," she said. "I told her. She didn't want to hear it from somebody who pushes a cart. That's all. People hear the message in the voice that carries it." Casey frowned, "But you were right." "About the leak." "I was right about the leak." The girl looked at her for a second longer than was comfortable, the way the young do when they sense there's a whole continent under the little island you've shown them. And then her lanyard buzzed, and she had to go reset somebody's badge. And Nora was alone again with the cold air, and the road sound, and the stone in her pocket. The car didn't get fixed. Nora knew it didn't because she watched. She'd given up pretending she wasn't watching. Every morning the green car was in the Crane spot, nose out, and every morning she walked the long way around the pillar, and every morning she let her eyes go to the seam at the bottom of the front compartment where, if you knew, you could see the faintest dark crescent on the concrete that hadn't been there the day before. Nobody turned the clamp. The service that came to the house, whatever it was, either hadn't been called or hadn't found it, because finding it meant knowing the car, and knowing the car meant knowing where its particular sins lived. Nora knew. The lower hose ran a custom route because the original geometry didn't survive the rebuild, and the clamp sat behind a bracket where you couldn't see it without a mirror and a small flashlight, and the knowledge that it was there to look for. A factory tech wouldn't find it on a factory diagram because the car wasn't a factory car. It was a Hale car. There was a difference, and the difference was about to put Vivian Crane on the side of a highway, with steam coming out of the front of the most beautiful thing her father ever owned. Nora did not turn the clamp. She wanted to. Her hands wanted to. But she'd been told never to touch the car again, in front of witnesses, and she had a job she needed, and a small apartment with a rent that went up in March, and the part of her that had survived the last 8 years had survived by learning to keep her hands to herself. So she left a note. She wrote it on a square of the cardboard from a paper towel box, in pencil, in the block capitals she'd used on work orders her whole life. Lower coolant hose, clamp loose, behind bracket, driver's side. Needs 1/4 turn and top up before warm weather. She didn't sign it. She tucked it under the wiper at the angle that wouldn't scratch the glass. It was gone the next morning. She didn't know if it had been read or thrown away or blown into a gutter. The dark crescent on the concrete was a little bigger. She left another note 3 days later. Second notice. This will fail in heat. Please have someone look behind the bracket. She didn't sign that one either. It rained the day after that, a hard spring rain that turned the access road to a mirror, and the green car stayed home, and Nora found herself relieved and then annoyed at herself for being relieved, because what was it to her? She'd made the thing. She hadn't owned it in a quarter century. You give a thing away when the money clears. That was the rule. Daniel used to say it. It stops being ours when it leaves the bay, nor, otherwise you'll never sleep. But Daniel was dead, and the rule had died a little with him. Because the truth was you never really gave them all the way away. You just stopped being allowed to love them out loud. The weather turned in the second week of May. 3 days of sun that made the whole gray campus pretend to be somewhere else. And on the third day, the green car didn't come back in the evening. Nora knew because she stayed late. She told herself she stayed late to finish the stairwell lights, which she did finish. But the truth was she watched the Crane spot stay empty past 6, past 7, and a feeling started in her stomach that she recognized from 1,000 jobs. The feeling of having warned someone about exactly the thing that is now, somewhere out of your sight, happening. She heard about it the next morning from Casey, who heard everything. She didn't make it to her thing. Casey was vibrating, eyes huge. Some dinner, some big investor dinner she was supposed to drive in herself. It's like a whole thing, and the car died. On the highway. Steam everywhere. She's on the shoulder in a $4,000 dress. The tow truck couldn't even, they had to get a flatbed. You can't just hook those, and she missed the whole dinner. Marcus says she's in a mood you would not believe. He says don't even come up to 3 today. Nora set down her coffee. Something complicated moved through her. Not triumph. She was too old for triumph. But a kind of heavy vindicated grief. The feeling of being right about a thing you'd have given a lot to be wrong about. Where's the car now? Some shop. The Lambo dealer, I guess, the official one, an hour out. Marcus says she's already mad at them too because they're saying it's gonna be weeks because it's not a normal, something about it not matching their computer. Casey shrugged, the whole drama already half converted into entertainment in her young head. Whatever that means. It meant the dealer had plugged the car into a machine that knew about every Lamborghini ever built, and the machine had said, "This is not one of the cars I know." It meant some 28-year-old master tech with a clean uniform and real credentials was standing in a clean bay looking at a green car that broke all his rules, finding a coolant route that wasn't on any diagram and a chassis brace that wasn't in any manual and 100 small intelligent decisions made by hand in a building that no longer existed. And he was going to do the honest thing, which was tell Vivian Crane he could keep her car for a month and maybe get it close. Nora finished her coffee. She walked the lot. She let the long quiet of the work do what it did. And that night in her small kitchen with the window dark enough to throw her own face back at her, she got out the cardboard from another paper towel box, and she sat for a long time with the pencil in her hand, and then she didn't write a note. She wrote a list. Parts. 2 hose clamps, the right ones, not the dealers. A length of silicone in the diameter only she would think to check. A gasket she'd have to make. Numbers she hadn't written in 8 years came up out of her hand like they'd been waiting just under the skin. She looked at the list for a while. Then she folded it into a tight triangle, the way somebody had folded that parking stub 3 weeks ago, and she put it in her coat pocket, and she went to bed. The dealer kept the car 11 days and gave it back worse. This was not the dealer's fault exactly. They'd found the coolant leak. Anyone could find a leak. And they'd replaced the clamp and the hose with their own parts, the good factory parts, the correct parts for a car this was supposed to be and wasn't. And the new clamp didn't seat right against the bracket that shouldn't have been there. And the new hose was a hair too stiff to make the bend that the old soft one had been chosen to make. And so now it sealed, but it pulled. And pulling, over a few warm days, it had started to weep at the other end. Where it met, a fitting Daniel had turned on a lathe in 1999, because the one that was supposed to go there had never existed for this application. The car came home, not leaking from the place it had leaked, and leaking instead from a place that, on paper, could not leak. The car came back into the Crane spot on a flatbed, was rolled off carefully by 2 men in dealer polos, and sat their nose out, beautiful and wrong, with a fresh dark crescent already starting under it before lunch. Nora watched the whole thing from the second level, leaning on her cart, and she felt sick. That afternoon she did something she had told herself she would not do. She went up to 3. The executive floor was carpet so thick it ate the squeak of her cart, and glass, and the kind of quiet that money buys. Marcus had told her to stay off it. She told Marcus she had a flickering ballast in the corner conference room, which was true. She'd flagged it herself a week ago and sat on the work order precisely, because she'd had a feeling she might one day want a reason to be up there. She changed the ballast. It took 6 minutes. And then, because the corner conference room had a glass wall, and because the glass wall looked onto a corner office, and because the corner office door was open, she heard Vivian Crane. "I don't care what the diagram says. I don't care that it's not a standard car. It's my father's car. He had it built. He loved it. He left it to me. And I have had it for 5 years, and it ran perfectly for 5 years, and now in 1 month 2 different so-called experts have made it worse. And I am asking you a simple question. Can you fix it or not?" A pause, a voice on speaker, tinny, apologetic. "Then who can?" Vivian's voice had a crack in it now, the kind that comes when anger is the only acceptable shape for something that is actually closer to fear. "There has to be. Somebody built this thing. Somebody put it together with their hands. Where are they? Find me the builder." A longer pause. The tinny voice said something about the shop being closed a long time, said something about the owner having passed, said the records were probably gone. "Passed," Vivian repeated flat. Of course they have." And then, quieter, not for the speaker, not for anyone, just out of her into the room, "Everybody who knew how the thing actually worked is gone." Nora stood very still in the conference room with the new ballast humming softly above her, holding a screwdriver she didn't need, looking through 2 panes of glass at a woman she'd watched scream at her in a parking garage, and she understood something she hadn't let herself understand before. The car wasn't a trophy. The car was the last room in the world that still had Arthur Crane in it. And his daughter was standing at the door of that room, watching strangers take it apart, and she couldn't stop them. And she didn't know that the one person alive who could walk into that room and turn the lights back on was 3 floors below her every morning, pushing a cart with a squeaky wheel, opening the lot. The owner having passed. Nora put the screwdriver in her pocket. She had let them think Hale Coachworks died with Daniel because in every way that mattered it had. But she was Hale too. She'd always been the other Hale, the one whose name was on the door in the same paint, the one who did the metal while Daniel did the machine work and the talk. And at every show and in every magazine it had been Daniel they photographed because Daniel was the one who could stand in front of a car and tell its story. And Nora had let him, because she didn't care about the photograph. She cared about the bead at the bottom of the door that nobody would ever see. She had spent 8 years being the part of a thing that nobody photographed. She left the conference room. She rode the elevator down. She passed her own reflection in the brushed steel letters of Arthur J. Crane, founder, and she didn't look away from it this time. She fixed the car that night. She knew she shouldn't. She knew it was the kind of thing that ends with police and a story in the local paper, and a job lost and maybe worse. She did it anyway, and she did it the way she'd been taught to do everything, which was completely. She had a key to the lot. She had a key to everything. She came in at 1 in the morning when the building was a dark hull and the only light was the green glow of the exit signs and the slow orange pulse of the ramp heater's standby. She brought her own work light, the good cordless one she'd kept out of the auction because the man buying the shop's tools hadn't known to ask for it. She brought the parts she'd bought with her own money from a supplier 2 towns over who still remembered her name and had said, on the phone, "Nora Hale, my God, I thought you were dead." And she'd said no, just quiet. She rolled out a moving blanket and lay down on the cold concrete beside the green car and went in from underneath. And the years came off her like a coat she'd forgotten she was wearing. She found the dealer's stiff hose pulling at Daniel's lathe-turned fitting. She found the clamp seated wrong against the brace they'd built in the cold January of 1999, when the heater in the shop quit and they'd worked in their coats, and Daniel had kept saying we should pack it in, and she'd kept saying one more, just this one. She took the dealer's good correct wrong parts off, and she put on the soft hose that would make the bend, and she clocked the clamp the way it had to be clocked, behind the bracket, where you'd never find it unless you'd put it there. She topped it up. She bled it. She wiped down every fingerprint she left because she would not leave the car worse in any way, not even a smudge. And then, because she was already there, because no one was watching, because she had her hands inside the thing she'd made for the first time in 25 years and might never again, she did the rest. She did the things she'd seen in the 3 weeks of walking the long way around the pillar and pretending not to look. The wheel that sat a degree off because someone had curbed it and a chain shop had eyeballed the alignment. The clunk in the shifter that was a worn bushing she could fix with a part she happened to have because she'd made 100 of them by hand once and kept the last few like a sentimental fool. The clock on the dash that had stopped, which wasn't a fault, just a battery, a $2 battery that nobody had bothered with because it didn't matter, except that it had been running when Arthur Crane was alive and Nora set it by her phone and got it ticking again because she thought, irrationally, that it should be ticking. She finished a little after 4. She lay on her back on the cold floor under the car for a minute longer than she needed to, looking up at the underside of a thing she knew the way she knew her own hands. And she let herself be a builder again for 60 more seconds before she got up and folded the blanket and became a janitor. She left no note. There was nothing left to warn anyone about. She did leave one thing, but it wasn't a note and it wasn't new. She'd left it in 1999. She just made sure it could be found. Vivian drove the car for a week before she said anything. Nora knew she was driving it because it left in the morning now and came back in the evening, and there was no crescent on the concrete. And one evening she watched from the second level as Vivian pulled in, nose out, and sat in the car for a long moment after she'd shut it off, both hands on the wheel, head tipped back against the rest, the way you sit in a car that has just done exactly what you wanted it to do and reminded you of someone in the doing. Then on a Thursday, Marcus found Nora in the supply closet and said, with the particular careful blankness of a man delivering a summons he doesn't understand, "Ms. Crane wants to see you. Upstairs. Nowish." Casey, restocking paper towels, went very still. "Did I do something?" Nora said, mostly to give Marcus the line he expected. She didn't say, she just said the maintenance woman who opens the lot. Marcus shifted. He was a decent man, a tired man, a man who'd worked his way up from this same closet and never forgot it. "You want me to come up with you?" "No," Nora said. "Thank you, Marcus, no." The corner office was bigger than her apartment and had a view of the access road and the hills behind it going green. Vivian Crane stood at the window with her back to the door, and on the desk between them, where another executive might keep a photo of a family, was a single small object that stopped Nora at the threshold. It was a builder's plate, brushed aluminum the size of a credit card, hand-stamped, the letters slightly uneven because a person had hit them one at a time with a punch and a hammer. Hale Coachworks, and under that smaller, built by hand, and under that 2 sets of initials because they'd always done 2 because it was a 2-person shop no matter what the magazine said. DH and beside it NH. It lived behind the bracket, the same bracket. You'd never find it unless you took the front end half apart, or unless someone had pulled it loose and set it where you'd see it the next time you opened the compartment to check a clamp that was, now, finally, correct. "Sit," Vivian said without turning. Nora didn't sit. She stood inside the door with her hands at her sides, coveralls and steel-toed boots, and a face that had learned over 50 years to give nothing away. Vivian turned. She looked older than she had in the garage, or maybe just less armored. She picked up the little plate and held it without looking at Nora. "My father had this car built by a shop called Hale Coachworks," she said. "I knew that. There's a folder. He kept everything, receipts, photos, a whole. He loved this car more than he loved most people, which, if you knew my father, was not nothing. A breath. When it broke, I called the dealer. The dealer called everyone. Everyone said the same thing. The shop closed years ago. The man who ran it died. I've spent a month being told that the only people who understood this car are gone." She set the plate down, square, deliberate. "And then last week I opened the front to check the coolant because I check it now. I learned my lesson there, and this is sitting on top of the radiator. Loose. Where it could not have been because the last person to work on the car was a dealer who would never have taken the front clip apart and certainly wouldn't have left this where I'd find it." She looked up. "And the car is fixed, not patched, not close. The shifter that's clunked since I inherited it doesn't clunk. The wheel that pulled doesn't pull. The clock runs. The clock has not run since my father died, and now it runs, and I don't—" Her voice did the thing it had done through the glass, the crack, the place where anger ran out and something rawer showed. "I don't have an explanation that makes sense, so I'm asking you, because you're the one who opens the lot. You're the one I found with her hands in my engine, and She stopped. 2 sets of initials, DH and NH. The office was quiet. Out on the access road a truck went by. "D was my husband," Nora said. "Daniel. He did the machine work. He could talk to a car and to the person who owned it, which is rarer than you'd think and worth more than the metal. He's the one the magazines photographed. He died 8 years ago, and I closed the shop because I couldn't run it alone and because, mostly, I didn't want to." Vivian was very still. "N is me," Nora said. "Nora Hale. I did the metal. The chassis on this car came to us folded like a tin can, a wreck, a write-off. Your father bought the wreck because of what it had been. Daniel said it couldn't be done. I said it could. It took 14 months. I built the brace that holds the back of it together because the factory never made a part for what we needed, and I ran the coolant a way that isn't in any book because the book didn't survive the crash either. The clamp that started this whole thing sits behind that brace where a dealer's machine will never find it because the machine doesn't know the car exists. I do. I made it." She paused. "I made the plate too. I stamped it by hand. I always hit the H a little hard. You can see it. The H's are deeper than the rest. I never could get my hand to stop on that one letter." Vivian sat down, slowly, like her legs had decided it for her. She looked at the plate and the deeper H's, and then she looked at Nora, and something moved across her face that was not yet apology. That was much more uncomfortable than apology. That was the look of a person rearranging a fact they had been completely certain of. "I screamed at you," she said, "in the garage." "You did. You were fixing it. You were telling me it was broken and You were scared," Nora said. "It's your father's car. I built it for him. I watched him walk around it 3 times before he could say a word. He cried a little the day we delivered it. He'd never tell you that, men of his, he'd never. But he stood in the gravel and he put his hand on the roof and he cried. So I know what the car is. It isn't a car. It's the last room he's still in. I knew that the morning I opened the front. I should have left it alone. I couldn't. You build a thing with your hands and it doesn't matter how many years go by, when it tells you it's hurting you go to it. There isn't a card laminated strong enough to stop that." Vivian put her hand flat on the desk beside the plate. She didn't pick it up. For a while she didn't say anything, and Nora let her not say anything, because she'd spent 30 years across a counter from frightened, proud people, and she knew that the worst thing you could do was rush the part where they had to be quiet. "Why didn't you tell me?" Vivian said finally. "When I was screaming about people for the car, finding the builder, when I said everyone who knew it was gone, Marcus said you changed the lights up here. You must have. Why didn't you just come up and say, 'It's me, I'm the one, I built it'?" Nora thought about it. She owed the woman a true answer and she found she had one. "Because the first time you saw me, you'd already decided who I was," she said. "And I've spent 8 years being the part of a thing that nobody photographs. I wasn't going to climb 3 floors to convince someone I was more than the cart. I'm too old to audition." She let that sit. "But I wasn't going to let your father's car die on the side of a road either. Those 2 things were both true. So I left the plate where you'd find it, and I figured you could decide for yourself whether you wanted to ask the question. You asked it. Here I am." Vivian Crane was not a woman who cried in offices. You could see that. You could see it was not in her repertoire, and you could see her not doing it now took something. She picked up the plate finally and turned it over in her fingers and pressed her thumb against the deep H's like she was reading them in Braille. "I don't know how to do this part," she admitted, and it came out so plainly, so stripped, that it changed the room more than any apology would have. "I'm not people tell you when you run a company that you have to project certainty. I'm extremely good at certainty. I was certain about you in the garage in about half a second and I was completely wrong, and the thing is I'm wrong like that all the time, I just usually never find out. The car broke and made me find out." She set the plate down. "I owe you an apology. I'm aware that's the smallest possible thing I owe you. I don't actually know what the rest of it is yet." "You don't owe me anything for the car," Nora said. "I did the car for him, and a little for myself. It felt—" She stopped, because she didn't have a clean word for what it had felt like, lying on the cold concrete at 4 in the morning with her hands inside the only thing she'd ever made that still existed in the world. "It felt good to be a builder for a night. That's mine to keep. You don't owe me for that." "The apology then. You'll take the apology." "I'll take the apology." "Then I'm sorry," Vivian said, and she said it looking right at Nora, no phone in her hand, no audience on the second level, nothing performed in it. "I'm sorry for the garage. I'm sorry I decided what you were before I knew. I'm sorry the only reason I'm finding out who you are is that I needed something from you, which is, frankly, the worst possible reason, and I know it." Nora nodded once. It was enough. It wasn't going to fix 8 years or 25, and it didn't have to, because that wasn't what an apology was for. An apology was just one person agreeing to see another one. You took it for what it was. "All right," she said. It didn't end with a job offer, not that day. Nora had read enough stories in the breakroom paper to know how those were supposed to go: the grand reveal, the tearful boss, the corner office handed over, the music swelling. Real life moved with more friction than that, and Vivian Crane, to her credit, didn't try to buy her way out of the discomfort with a gesture. What happened was smaller and meant more. Vivian asked if she could see the rest of what Nora had done, not to the car, to her. And Nora said it was a long story, and Vivian said she'd cleared her afternoon, and they sat in the office that was bigger than Nora's apartment, and Nora talked. About the shop. About Daniel, who could sell a man his own car back to him and have him grateful for the privilege, and who could not, for the life of him, lay a clean weld, which was fine because that was hers. About the 14 months. About the green that got mixed 3 times. About the day they delivered it and Arthur Crane cried in the gravel. Vivian listened to all of it with an attention Nora hadn't been given by anyone in a long time, and when Nora got to the part about Arthur crying, she watched the daughter's eyes go bright and stay that way, and neither of them said anything about it, which was the right thing. And at the end Vivian said, "My father used to say the most expensive thing in the world is a person who actually knows how something works. He said you can buy anything except that. He said when you find one you hold on with both hands." She looked out at the green hills. "He found you, apparently, and I almost lost you over a parking garage." "You didn't lose me," Nora said. "I opened the lot at 5:40. I've been here the whole time." The job came a month later, and it came correctly, which is to say it came as a real thing and not a guilty one. Strand Robotics, it turned out, had a problem nobody upstairs had words for. The company built machines that did the same motion 10,000 times a day, and when one of them developed a fault, the only people who could feel the fault before the sensors caught it were the line techs, old hands who'd put their palm on a housing and say, "That one's getting tired," and be right, and have no way to prove how they knew. The engineers with the degrees couldn't hear it. The machines couldn't hear themselves. There was a whole layer of knowledge in the building that lived in people's hands and died when they retired, undocumented, unphotographed, exactly the kind of knowledge that Vivian Crane had spent a month learning the price of when a green car broke, and the only person who understood it was pushing a cart. Vivian offered Nora the job of catching it, of walking the line, listening, putting her hand on the housings, and teaching the engineers to translate what her hands knew into the language their sensors spoke. It wasn't a janitor's job, and it wasn't an executive's job, and it didn't fit any box on the org chart, which Vivian said was the point, and they made up a title for it that Nora thought was a little ridiculous and accepted anyway because the work was real. Nora kept opening the lot for the first 2 weeks even after she didn't have to, out of habit, and Casey kept finding her at lunch in the loading dock. And on her last morning with the keys, Nora stood by the Crane spot and looked at the green car for a while, nose out, no crescent under it, the clock running. Casey came and stood beside her, eating bread with the suggestion of a sandwich. "So that whole time," Casey said, "when she yelled at you, you built it, you actually built it." "I built it. And you just took it. You just said clear and walked off." Nora considered the car, and the bead at the bottom of the door that nobody would ever see, and the deep H's on a plate now sitting on a CEO's desk where a family photo should be. "People hear the message in the voice that carries it," she said. "I've known that my whole life. The trick most people never learn is that it works the other way too. Doesn't matter what voice you've got. If the thing you're saying is true and you wait long enough, the truth finds its own way to the front of the room. The car was always going to tell her. I just had to be patient enough to let it." Casey chewed on that and on her bread. "That's still kind of a long time to wait, though," she said. Nora laughed, which surprised them both. "It is," she agreed. "It's a very long time to wait." She handed Casey the heavy ring of keys, because the girl was taking over the lot, and she showed her the trick with the salt bin and the gray box that ran the ramp heaters and the back left wheel of the cart that squeaked no matter what. And then she walked into the building she'd swept for 3 weeks as a ghost, past the brushed steel letters of a dead man's name, and she didn't look at her reflection in them, because she didn't need to anymore. She knew who was standing there. Behind her in the Crane spot, the green car sat in the early light, low and wide, and the particular green of a bottle held up to a window, ticking quietly to itself, keeping time.